the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Please be seated. This Sunday, which for very obvious reasons, if you paid attention to anything up till now, is called Good Shepherd Sunday. That's an informal name. It's not in the prayer book. But it's particularly meaningful to me because the congregation, the church that I grew up in, was called the Church of the Good Shepherd. Now, this is really interesting in the panhandle of Texas because if you think back to the, quote, Wild West, there was an intense competition between the cattlemen, the farmers, and the sheep herders. And everybody hated the sheep because of this simple reason. They graze the grass down to the dirt. Cattle do not. They always leave a little, and so sheep were hard on the land. Now, in the Middle East, where goats and sheep are essential and cattle were a luxury, they had to know this. And so shepherds had to move their flocks regularly because they knew that the sheep would destroy the land if they allowed them to just stay in one place too long. Now, you may know I did get a little bit of sheep history when I was out in Steamboat Springs and went over to St. Mark's and Craig on a regular basis, that there are a lot of Basque shepherds that came to Colorado back in the day, and then still sheep are herded and kept out in western Colorado. Nonetheless, all the imagery of shepherd is foreign to us. Unless somebody want to raise their hand, does anybody have actual real experience of sheep? All right, 2 or 3 people. The rest of us are clueless. But I'm going to say some things, and so the 3 of you that know, if I'm saying something wrong, go this way. Domestic sheep are stupid. Yes, okay. And that's because they've been bred through generations to be docile, to be dependent upon humans for their well-being. Left to their own devices, they will starve, freeze, get eaten by wild animals, fall off the cliff. Any number of bad things will happen to them because they don't know how to care for themselves any longer. Now, this is not true of Rocky Mountain sheep, is it? Any of you who've ever driven over I-70 sooner or later, or over Highway 14, have seen Rocky Mountain sheep and the great ram's horns that symbolize CSU. And they can take care of themselves just fine, thank you. Their lives may be short and difficult, but they don't need humans to survive. Utterly wild, live entirely on their own instincts, and they know how to survive and to propagate their species as long as the environment is intact. One might think, over the long evolution of the human creature, a very tiny bit of it actually represented by the history of Israel and Christians. Tiny. We're just a little tiny bit of human history. The rest of it, and certainly going back hundreds of thousands of years, we were pretty wild creatures, living almost entirely by instinct. Anthropologists and archaeologists, which I still read those kinds of articles on a regular basis, as they try to trace the movement from a kind of hominid or ape-like creature that was on all fours or in the trees to a tool-making creature, to a socially gathered creature, to a creature that would move about, migrate in response to adversity, finally reaching certain, at the end of this whole line, species that drew art in caves, that buried their dead, that marked bones and sticks, and seemed to have reached a place, and certainly in the archaeological record, reached a place where the brain cavity supported a brain big enough to have genuine self-consciousness. And somewhere in that little process, human beings began to be spiritual. That is to say, the evidence shows that they were doing things that indicated that they believed in something larger than themselves, something that they could appease or direct or whatever. And slowly but surely, over several 100,000 years, the Homo sapiens came. They competed with the Neanderthals and the Denisovans, and humankind as we know it came out on top. And all the other kinds of hominids, whether they were intelligent or had speech or any of those things, disappeared, extinct. Now, I don't know about you, but that really makes me think about God. Now, a lot of people think that makes God irrelevant because it doesn't match up with what Genesis tells them really happened. But I want to tell you, Genesis is not what really happened. Genesis shows that whole progression of the awareness of God, the awareness of choice, the awareness of moral choice, and the consequences of bad choices, and led to the people of Israel. The whole, it's just read Genesis. Genesis is a wonderful story. Just don't take it as history. There were no journalists there taking pictures and writing it down as all this happened. It was all written down thousands and thousands of years after it was a story at the campfire. That doesn't bother my faith, because what I know is I'm now at the place where I recognize by my conscious mind, unless I'm delusional, that I'm utterly dependent. The delusion is that I'm independent. I'm not even independent of you, much less independent of God. Without the church, I wouldn't have supported my family for decades. I was dependent upon people like you to put money in a plate sufficient to pay me and to do all the other things that church does. Now, that being as it is, there's lots of people who are dependent on organizations, whether it's school districts, city governments, whether it's IBM or Google, whether it's the UC Health or Banner. Y'all can all tell me. And some of you, with some degree of real courage, actually maybe started and owned businesses of your own and lived and died on what you could make happen. And yet even you were dependent on other people, whether employees or customers or clients. Nobody is an island unto themselves in this world. So if we can first start with that truth, that all of us are dependent on certainly the children, we know they're dependent upon whoever home they live in, whoever provides food, shelter, clothing, education, and whatnot. We all start utterly helpless and dependent upon whoever births us. Now, I say all of this because our culture wants to delude us into thinking that the way we live is by individualism. Now, there's nothing wrong with me taking responsibility for myself. That's a good kind of individualism. You're not responsible for my behavior, and I'm not responsible for yours. At the same time that I say that if I didn't have Gail, my children, her children, my sister, my cousins, the people in this world who love me, I would shrivel up because I'm no longer dependent upon you. I'm living off of what all the people I preached to all those years gave to the pension fund. And what all of us who worked gave to Social Security and Medicare. I'm grateful. I am immensely grateful at this point for the sacrificial giving that people did that made it possible for me to have a comfortable life in my older years. So when we get rid of the delusion that we are somehow independent and an island unto ourselves, then the question starts to be, are we happy about who we're dependent upon? Sometimes people are trapped in marriages, particularly women, where they're so dependent upon the husband's earnings it's not so true today, but believe me, I have sat with widows who did not know how much money was in their checking account, nor how to use a check, because they were so dependent upon the husband in their life who earned all the money and controlled it all. Me, I give it to Gail. You pay the bills, I just write this check, and I'm happy. So I'm not so caught up in that ego thing or that old way of thinking. But the truth is that when we're dependent to the point of being incapable, that's unhealthy. So what does it mean to be dependent upon God? I'm getting to that. You know I'm getting there. If Jesus is the good shepherd, now last week we were children who didn't know how to take care of ourselves. This week we're stupid sheep who will completely run off the edge of the cliff without a shepherd. The New Testament does not necessarily have a high regard for individualism or human capacity, especially spiritually. Here's a truth that I know. Most of the most difficult calamities I ever experienced in life were of my own making. A few I might be able to actually push off on others. But mostly it was because I wanted to go my own way. I wanted to live on instinct. I wanted to be the wild sheep. I didn't want to be the sheep that got herded and put in the pen and had to stay with everybody else and follow the rules that the shepherd made. But I also discovered every time I tried to live that way, that's when the calamities happened. So I'm the sheep that I'm pretty sure Jesus had to go off and find me several times throughout my life and bring me back on his shoulders to the herd. Not willingly. I'm sure I was kicking and the whole way. Put me down. To put ourselves in the hands of God, to join Jesus' flock. And he says there are other flocks not like this one. He's talking about, I'm probably thinking, he's talking about the people of Israel and his disciples. That's the flock that they all knew. I have other flocks too. I've always thought, oh, that's the Buddhists. That's Islam. That's Confucius. That's all these other spiritual thinkers who tried to give some direction, some philosophy, some meaning and direction to human social life. So I don't despise them. I respect them. I don't respect them when they don't love one another as Christ loved us. The highest calling is the point at which we are no longer mindless sheep, but conscious sheep. Sheep that have a conscience and a consciousness. It's important to get those two words and to connect them. Consciousness, our ability to reflect, know, learn, think, ponder, wonder. And conscience, the ability to choose between that which is right and that which is wrong. Even if we're not sure, we have to make choices. So 1 John gives us over and over the ultimate direction from the shepherd. Love one another as I have loved you. The Gospel of John. The Good Shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The thief comes and steals and pillages and runs from danger. But how can the Good Shepherd herd us, so to speak? Herds us from the inside. There is no rod, there is no staff, except for the consequences of my calamitous choices, which sometimes felt like getting knocked up against the head with a 2x4 sort of thing. But I have to turn over my will. Not my will in the sense that I give it over and become a robot or a puppet, but I give over my will to the love and care of a God who knows best for me and knows best for you at the same time. And therefore, it's a pretty complicated thing. How do I do the best for me and do the best for you at the same time? It's when I lay my life down for your sake. And it doesn't mean martyrdom. I'm not really looking for that. But it does mean that over and over again, through my life, through my vocation, I have given up what might have been the maximal life for myself and my kids in order to serve the church. And the church is full of really unruly sheep. Really unruly. Oh my God. There's always a few that want to hang around, right around under your skirts. And then there's the one, you spend all your time out there trying to herd the ones that are slipping off the edges back into the group. And it's exhausting. It's an exhausting vocation to stand in some way in the place of the high priest that we meet at this altar. To stand in some way, as the bishop does, carrying a sheep's crook, to try to manage all the congregations and institutions that make up the Diocese of Colorado. And there aren't enough of us anymore. Everywhere, churches are struggling to find someone to come be They're stand-in shepherd. And that's all I call us clergy, is we're sort of stand-ins for the real good shepherd. And some of us do it better than others. Some of us are more popular than others. Some of us have gifts that exalt them and move them up the chain. And others of us have disabilities that keep us lower down with the smaller flocks. I don't know. It's a mystery to me how we all end up where we are. But somebody's going to end up with you. And by golly, you better love them. You better be willing to lay down your life for someone who's giving their life to you. And they're going to be so imperfect and so lacking in whatever skill or ability or personality piece that you particularly want to see in your shepherd. You need to get ready. I'm going to leave May 19th. That's my last Sunday. Now, I may be back through in later years filling in on vacations or whatever. I'd love to do that. But you need to be ready to accept somebody who, unlike me, will have authority in this congregation. You love me because I can't make any decisions. You love me because I never sit in a vestry meeting and say, we're not going to do that. That's crazy. You love me because I'm not going to stand up here and say, you need to give money because I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to support my family. I just get to come and say whatever I think and leave. Now, I appreciate your love, and I appreciate the affirmation I've received from you, but you need to know that standing in for the good shepherd, the real shepherd, the high priest, the real priest, is a frightening vocation. And we all just try to do the best we can with what we get. It's kind of like your parents. They did the best they could with what they had and what they knew. And none of them were perfect, right? None of us were perfect parents, right? You that are still parenting little children, take heart in the fact that none of us did it really well. A few did it better than others, but we all did it blind. There's no real guidebook except what we got from our own parents. So what I'm saying is that being dependent on people, and particularly being dependent on a priest, is dangerous. I'm up here to sort of to point the way. I am not the way. I'm pointing to the way so that you can, inside yourself, access that conscience and that consciousness, and to let it be shaped by the gospel, by the writings of the New Testament, by the traditions of the church, by the sacraments, by all the things we do as a herd that want to point us to the best life. The life where I'm willing to lay down my life for your sake. And you're willing to lay down your life for my sake. This is a high calling. And frankly, your calling is just as scary as mine, if you embrace it, if you live by it, if every morning you get up and say, your will be done, not mine. The Good Shepherd loves you and only wants your best, but only your best as it relates to your best and your best and your best and your, because we're social creatures in a herd. Stick with the herd and follow the Good Shepherd, and you will learn to have your best life.